They thought it was just a frozen body, until some of them swore. It moved. High in a remote mountain range buried beneath layers of ancient ice, a team of modern climbers made a discovery that should have belonged entirely to the past. A human body preserved inside a glacier, untouched by decay, untouched by time, and preserved with such unsettling realism that several members of the expedition refused to remain near it after dark. What they saw in the ice was not a skeleton, not weathered remains, not the fragile outline of someone long gone. They found a man who appeared frozen in the middle of an unfinished gesture, as if life had been paused in the middle of a moment that never completed. The discovery happened near an isolated ridge where storms rise suddenly and temperatures plunge without warning. Few expeditions travel that route, and those who do rarely stop for long. But on that day, the climbers noticed something unusual embedded in a sheet of clear blue glacial ice, a shape too symmetrical to be rock, too defined to be debris. They approached slowly, brushed away wind-packed snow, and the figure beneath the surface came into focus. The man sat partially upright inside the glacier, his posture natural, his arms positioned as if he had been shielding his face from the cold or trying to climb forward when the freezing wind overtook him. His clothing remained intact, thick wool fabric, stitching still visible, leather boots without noticeable rot or damage, every fold preserved in fine detail. His skin had not sunken or collapsed, his face retained natural structure, the lips had faint definition, and even strands of hair along his jaw were visible beneath the ice. It looked less like a corpse, and more like someone who had simply stopped moving. Based on the clothing style and equipment fragments frozen around him, some of the climbers believed he belonged to a lost 1930s mountain expedition known from regional archives. A team that vanished after a violent storm swept across the ridge without leaving any trace of their remains. Old accounts stated that one of the climbers separated from the group in low visibility and never reappeared, assumed to be buried somewhere along the pass. Those records described his disappearance, but not the condition in which he had now been found. The preservation was unnatural. There were no signs of decomposition, no breakdown of tissue structure, no tearing in the garments. It was as if the cold had sealed him at the exact second life ended, freezing every muscle fiber before time had a chance to do anything else. The longer they observed the body, the more unsettling the details became. The eyes were not fully closed. The muscles around the eyelids retained shape. The face was not slack. It did not resemble the still, expressionless state typical of a frozen body. It looked recent, lifelike, unfinished. One of the climbers moved closer to document the facial structure. As he watched the thin layer of frost across the eyelid, he suddenly stepped back in shock. He said he saw movement, a faint tightening, a brief flutter, a tiny reflex motion where no motion should exist. He hesitated before saying it aloud, knowing how impossible it sounded. But when he finally spoke and described what he thought he saw, another member quietly admitted having noticed the same movement earlier and choosing not to mention it. They continued to stare at the face, searching for reflections in the ice, distortions caused by light, subtle tremors from temperature pressure, anything to explain what they believed they saw. Yet every few minutes, one of them reported a slight contraction around the eye, almost identical to a natural reflex, the kind the body sometimes makes during the final seconds of life. There was no pulse, no heat, no nerve function. And still, something looked like it was trying to respond. Hours passed as the mountain wind grew sharper and clouds choked the horizon. Weather conditions worsened so quickly that the team had no choice but to establish camp nearby. Night fell hard across the ridge, and the valley plunged into absolute darkness broken only by the dim reflection of moonlight on the glacier where the frozen man sat beneath the ice. Some of the climbers tried to rest, but their thoughts remained fixed on the silent figure lying only a short distance away. Then the sounds began. At first, they assumed it was the groaning shift of ice under stress, a normal sound in frozen environments, heavy and distant. But these sounds were different. They were not echoing cracks or falling snow. They were footsteps. Slow, deliberate, patient footsteps pressing into the frozen ground, circling around their camp in a steady pattern that repeated again and again through the night. Whenever one of them opened the tent to investigate, the sound stopped completely. There were no shadows. No footprints in the snow. No sign of movement near the glacier's edge. The mountain went silent until the tent was closed again, and then moments later the same steady rhythm returned, pacing the same unseen path in darkness. Several members refused to sleep. They described the overwhelming sensation of being watched, not from the ridges or cliffs above them, but from the frozen shape beneath the ice. They felt as though the moment preserved inside the glacier had not yet ended, as if some fragment of life remained suspended there, unresolved, unfinished, waiting. By morning, they approached the body again only long enough to complete documentation. Photographs were taken, samples recorded, and a formal report drafted for institutional records. The official document described a preserved glacial remain consistent with historical disappearance and environmental freezing. It listed coordinates, approximate age, clothing condition, and presumed origin. It excluded everything else. There was no mention of eyelid movement. No mention of muscle reflex. No mention of footsteps circling the tents through the night. Every witness signed the report. None of them disputed its contents. But privately, in notebooks, in quiet conversations, and years later in personal letters, some of them admitted that the experience never left them. They spoke of the way the face seemed aware, the sense that the body had not fully crossed the threshold between life and death, and the persistent fear that something inside the ice was not entirely still. The body remains frozen in the glacier to this day, preserved in a moment that has never faded, suspended between a final breath and an endless winter, locked forever in the instant where time stopped moving, yet, for a few who stood beside it, never fully seemed to stop. If you enjoy real mystery stories like this, consider subscribing, it helps a lot.